Welcome to a new edition of the Famous Interviews with Joe Dimino. On this episode, we talk with author, multilingual speaker, and Turning Points coach, Sylvia Worsham. Before becoming an empowerment sales coach and keynote speaker, she was a multiple award-winning hospital sales representative for Pfizer Pharmaceuticals. Nowadays, she is conducting masterminds on leadership, sales, and personal growth, all the while coaching individuals and organizations on creating compelling visions, purpose, and identity to get out of their own way and thrive while still maintaining balance and joy. On Easter Sunday, August 8th, 2012, she had an experience that changed her life, and there were many other stories like this. She explains. Enjoy this interview.
Hi, Sylvia.
Hi, how are you?
Hey, it's Joe Dimino. Nice to meet you. How are you?
Nice to meet you too, Joe. It's a pleasure to meet you.
Great to meet you. Thanks for taking a minute out today. I appreciate it.
Of course. I appreciate you.
You bet. So you have quite a story, and I want to, before we get into the story, tell me, how did you survive COVID? How was that period of time, and how did it change you?
It actually was a very good period of time for me because I acted on one of God's promptings to write my first book and publish it. And so I did. I started to write it. I'm a journaler. I journal quite a bit, and I started to create the chapters. And because people were, at home quarantining, the only thing I could do for exercise was to walk out in nature. And that's where I would receive the downloads for every single chapter and every lesson I was teaching in each chapter. And our family got closer together in that we ate, meals together. My husband stopped traveling so much. And we started to really connect deeper as a family. And obviously none of us got affected too much by COVID. My brother almost died, but he was also on the front lines of this thing. He was director of COVID unit in South Texas, and so he was in direct contact with this thing. But it was pretty much a good time for us.
I just want to get a handle on, on paper there's a lot going on with you, but I want to know if you were in front of a bunch of grade school kids at a career day and one of the kids looks up and says, "What do you do for a living?" How would you answer that?
I empower people for a living. I empower them to live and to be the best version of themselves. And that's what I do for a living. And I help people turn inward, for their answers and find the joy that they're looking for.
So I'm curious, having that power that you wield with folks, how do you keep all of those things in line and in balance? Because if you're offering that to people, you obviously have to satiate your own life and your own sense of self. How do you parlay that out and keep everything in balance and harmony for your happiness and for those that you affect?
I practice a lot of self-care every single morning, and I do that on purpose so that I stay in balance and above the noise of the outside world, because it's really easy to get caught up in all of that. But I take time every single day, and I wake up and I go exercise. But the very first appointment I have is as soon as I wake up is with God. I converse with him and I ask him the tough questions. What do you need me to do? Who do you need me to serve today? Who am I going to bless with my words today? And the answers come throughout the day, and I stay open to it. People like you that will come into my life as messengers and will reveal certain answers to me that I've been seeking. And because he uses all of us, we're all his vehicles. So that's how I kind of keep everything in balance. I take care of myself. I put on the oxygen mask first, no pun intended. And that's how I can go out into the world and impact lives and turn more souls towards heaven. People that are angry with him, they believe in him, but they don't trust him. And I mean God. So I use my testimony to share with them. And when they hear it, they are blessed by it. So that's how I do it.
So let's get back to the beginnings of your life here and how you got this motivation and zeal, not only for what you do as a writer, but in your spirituality. Talk to me a little bit about where you were born and raised and what your childhood was like.
Sure. I was born in Houston, raised in Brownsville, Texas, so right on the border, and I was raised by two immigrant parents, both from Mexico. So in my house, we spoke Spanish and only Spanish, and we went out into the world, and I was raised by a high achiever. My father, coming from Monterrey, Mexico, came from very big time poverty, and so he was trying to make a name for himself as a medical doctor, and so he strove in his career, and that was the modeling I received. So my subconscious programming was, I must achieve to be worthy of being in this country, of being successful and significant. And so I landed in corporate America, in sales with Pfizer for many years, and it was a perfect breeding ground to achieve. And it was never enough, because in sales, the more you give them, the more they want from you. So it's a perfect place for a perfectionist achiever like me. And then 2012 rolls around, and I get woken up very dramatically by a near-death experience. And so that's really that's my background. That's who I am, but that awakening was the major turning point in my life. And it just kind of woke me up.
Well, yeah, and that's a huge point there. It was a near-death experience. Talk to me a little bit about what happened and what you realized and how your life dramatically changed after that.
And so what happened was that I'm already a single mom with a little boy. I've been divorced for about 3 years, and I meet who would become my second husband, right? And I make the choice to start taking birth control pills. And within taking them, I start to feel pain, right above my rib cage. And it's really strange, because I'm attributing it to stress. I have a highly stressful job. I work in the hospital division for Pfizer, and I'm earning a very good living. And I'm working 50 to 60-hour work weeks. So I just say, oh, it's stress. I can't finish my workouts, even though I'm exercising 7 days a week and I'm in perfect health condition. But then Easter comes around, and he wants my son to meet his family. And so for a single mom, that's a big deal, right? And my mom sees me the day before we're scheduled to leave, and she's like, don't go. You're pale. You can't even breathe. I was struggling to breathe. And so I consult my brother, who's a doctor, and he doesn't see me clinically, in person, but he talks to me over the phone, and he's like, you know what? I think it's this. It's the inflammation of the lining of the lung. It's really painful. Just take these, ibuprofen for 5 days. You should be fine, but it's going to be painful. And so we take off to Houston. My boy and I, we fly from South Texas to Houston, and we spend the night, luckily, and in the middle of the night, this pain just jolts me out of bed. It's a horrific pain. I cannot breathe. It feels like an elephant is stepping on my chest. And in that moment of sheer terror, I hear a prompting, my first miracle of Easter weekend, lean forward and you'll be able to breathe. And the next morning when I get admitted to St. Luke's Episcopal Hospital, the doctor comes into my room after they do a scan of my lungs. And he says, you know what? A woman in your condition should not be sitting up talking to me. That pain you felt last night? He said 2 blood clots were going through your heart to get to your left lung, and they're really large. I'm surprised they didn't stop your heart. And so they admit me. But he says, we still have to check you out because there's more going on here and we don't know what's going on. And that's that scene that I wrote in my page on Podmatch, where I get 6 doctors in my room. And they tell me, you're in critical condition. You have a massive blood clot, and it is it's blocking the blood supply to all your organs, especially your liver. And we're running against time, and we don't know what to do because your case is unlike any other case. But we're going to do this therapy. And when they go through the whole option of all the side effects that go along with this option that they're going to give me, and they get to death, I have this just moment of total surrender to God, because I'm faced with a situation where I have zero control. And my experts are they're not confident I'm going to survive the night. In fact, they told my dad and my siblings, who are doctors, behind the scenes, that I had a 20% chance of surviving. And I don't know this, obviously. I get wheeled into ICU, and the next morning, a woman with the Catholic diocese walks into the room. And she looks at her papers and she says, Sylvia, do you want to pray with me? And I was raised Catholic, So we started reciting Our Father with my boyfriend in the room and in a circle. And then in the middle of the most terrifying moment of my life, I feel this love and this peace and this knowing that I'm okay. I feel like I'm being cradled by God's loving arms. And she leaves the room, and my boyfriend turns to me and he says, "You felt them too, didn't you?" And I just knew I was okay. And within 20 minutes, they do a test, and they come back. The doctors are like totally shocked, because the third and final miracle was that I had no long-term complications. And a case like mine, I should have been, my lungs should have had holes in them, and they didn't. Totally miraculous. And so it wakes me up. And I start to question, why did I survive? I had multiple pulmonary embolisms when people get one and they die. So there must be a powerful reason. There must be a purpose why I survived. So I start to make those hard choices in my life of trading off this significance, this life of, needing to earn money and needing to achieve for a quieter pace and waiting for his timing, like patience in his timing, is something I wrote about in Journey to Me, that first book I was talking about earlier. And he's chiseling away. I become a stay-at-home parent, and he's chiseling away all these elements that just don't belong to me, that have been built up over time through my modeling and expectations and fear-based ego, And he's slowly taking all these elements away from me. And then in 2017, as I have my daughter, I now have a baby girl. I've married my soulmate. And a prompting comes through very urgently. Call Bridget from the John Maxwell team. And so I do. I act. I have learned now, after that surrender and acceptance of my fate in the ICU, I have learned to trust him, to trust his promptings and to act on them very promptly. And I do, and I start the process of becoming a speaker, coach, and trainer with the John Maxwell team that very morning. And that journey starts, that entrepreneurial journey that we all go through when we first, start. It has these waves, right? And then 2020 hits. And that prompting, write your book, it's time, trust me. And so I do. And so I've now come full circle from that perfectionist achiever through many years, don't mind you. And the ego will always rear its ugly head, if you let it. But I now have become a coach, so I understand how awareness works. And when it does, I interrupt it, and I don't let it. So that's where I'm at today as an author,
Have you ever thought, and I'm sure you have, that if this didn't happen to you, this medical scare and all of these, feelings that you got as a result, do you think you would have changed your life, or do you think you would have been in your old self doing what you always did before?
I think, honestly, I needed to go through an awakening like this, because I was that stubborn child of God that thought, and I'm saying that very specifically, I could do it on my own without his help. And this clearly gave me a view of what life in relationship with God looked like. It's a lot more peaceful. It's a lot more joyful and less lonely. So I do think, to me, when I look back at my life, I am so grateful for that experience. So grateful. It was the best thing that could have happened to me, because I probably likely would have continued down that fear-based path had I not.
So who would you consider in your life a hero or a role model that you've always looked up to?
My Aunt Patricia, she has always been one of my biggest role models. She, like me, became a single mom with 2 young kids, and she is an author. She is a badass in her own right. She got her PhD in psychology in France, so she's trilingual like I am. And she has always been a thriver. I always used to say a fighter, but really she's a thriver. She has learned that lovely balance in life. And I just admire her so immensely, because she has come through so much trauma to triumph. And so it's something to look to and say, yes, I love that, how she role models that to me.
So if you could meet anybody alive on the planet right now, who would you like to meet and talk to?
Oh man, so many people. How do I pick just one?
You can pick multiple. That's fine.
I'm trying to. I really, that's such a good question. I'm sure you get such random answers to that question.
Yeah.
I think alive now. I mean, I would love to speak to God in person. That would be so great, like to actually see him, not just feel him. But she's already dead, but Mother Teresa would have been someone I would have loved to have spoken to at some point, because she had that kindness about her and that patience about her. Another person I admire immensely just for the way they give of themselves to the world would be Deepak Chopra. I think the one that does all the meditation. I think he has it down to a science, as does Eckhart Tolle. Those guys would be guys I'd love to just sit down and pick their brain and really understand what living in the now looks like and feels like, because I know that I struggle immensely at times. My fear-based ego wants to take me back to the past, or sometimes, I get afraid for my kids and I want to push forward to the future. But I think those two guys that are currently living would really have some of the answers that I'm looking for.
So speaking of inspiration, what's been one of the best fan letters or responses you've gotten from your writing and your work?
Very recently, I had a nurse that when I was a Pfizer rep, that's how she remembered me. And she's been one of the top followers of Journey to Me. She has written, your work is really needed in this world, she said. She goes, I'm a nurse and I've gone through so much trauma in my life, and your book has really looked at trauma in such a vulnerable and beautiful way, and you've allowed us to experience it through your life and then use the formulas that you shared in the book to really allow us to find the answers that we're seeking within ourselves. And to me, it was so touching to hear that, because, she said, not only has it touched my life, but now I've recommended you to a bunch of nurses that are going through a lot of trauma that could really use your help so that we can be there for the rest of humanity. And I think that's such a wonderful thing to hear, because those frontline workers, because of COVID, were really beaten down, and they really need to be at the top of their game to be able to serve humanity at the highest of levels. So that to me was like a beautiful testimony.
So when you look back on your life, you've seen many roads and there's been so many things that have happened. If you have a dream tonight and the younger version of yourself, say in your 20s, and you run into that version of you, and you can give that version one piece of advice based on the wisdom that you've accumulated over your life. And it's not about regret, it's about just dispensing good advice. Yep. What would you say to your younger version?
I would tell her, Sylvia, you are enough. You don't need to prove anything. Just be joyful and happy and enjoy the pockets of joy in the journey. That's what life is truly about.
Everyone has a perception of you, your family, your friends, your fans, colleagues, but ultimately you live your life. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
I'm someone who went from being a survivor, someone who thrived on her pain and fear for a long time, to someone that has pushed through that side of her and who's now stepping joyfully into a new chapter that God is asking her to be in, and it's a different version of me, right? And it's not something I'm comfortable with, but I've learned to step into the space that he's asking me to step into, and I trust him implicitly. So the perception I have of me is someone who has gone from being a survivor to being a thriver in her life, who's used major turning points and the opportunity that change provides her to become that light in the world that God created her to be.
So my final question to you is this, if someone reads your story and everything, and as far as I'm concerned, it's pretty indelible in my personal life too, that there is a higher power, there is a God. I mean, there's been many examples of that. But if you ran into a skeptic, maybe an agnostic, that wasn't quite sure, and you could tell them something that would convince them that there is a higher power and there is good in spirituality as a person on this planet, what would you say to them?
I think I would first start off with that person in understanding, like wanting to understand their journey, because they didn't get to be that person unless they journeyed through something. They lost their faith along the way. So it was like, what was that one time? What was the reason why you lost your faith? You know, and asking them that. But what would I would first try to understand their journey, and then in talking to them, I would share the times that God has shown up in my life, you know, and use my story and say, you know, and try to connect with them at that level of not believing, or when I lost my faith, because there was a time in my life I lost my faith. And so I can relate to people that are kind of skeptical a little bit. They got cynical about religion, you know, but we're talking about different situation when it's religion or faith. So it would be a longer conversation, because I think to think that you could say something that would really switch their mind, I don't know that can actually happen, you know, and because I've come across a lot of people that are like that, and it's taken them time. I think the more we talk to them and the more we understand their journey instead of telling them, I think that's why they lost their faith in the first place.
That's a great answer. Yeah, that's a great answer. And before we depart here, I want to make sure if anyone wants to get your books, if they want to know about you anymore, anything that you're doing in your story, where's the best place for them to go on the web to do that?
You know what? LinkedIn is really where I do a lot of my postings, and there's links to the book if they want to buy the book, and to other publications that I'm currently involved with. And that's really my landing page for now, because I need to update my webpage. So LinkedIn, I'm under Sylvia Worsham, and you can see the recommendations of what people think of when they work with me and their impressions. I think that's the best place.
Wonderful. Sylvia, I'm always fascinated with the kind of story that you have, where you do feel, you know, I've never felt that. I've had a sensation before, but I totally believe it, and I think it's wonderful, and it's so good that, you know, things just, you know, you're living the life that you want to live, and you're sharing that with people. So I appreciate you taking your time out to do that today.
Of course. And I would love to hear your story at some point. I didn't know if you had time right now, but I guess maybe not.
Yeah. I would be more than happy to. When I was young, when I was a kid and I ran around, one of my best friends, his name was Matt, and he had a liver abscess, and it was a continual thing, and he was in and out of the hospital. So we would play, and he'd come in and he'd hook up to an IV, and he had a pouch, and I just was always used to that. Well, I was 17. He was 17. I was 16. I got a phone call that he passed, and it was pretty tumultuous. I mean, we were best friends. I mean, we kind of grew away because we were hitting our teen years, and he had step parents, and we just didn't see each other as much as we could have. But anyway, after he passed, I would see him in my dreams, and he would tell me, you know, hey, I'm still here, and I would just look around at our childhood, and I was like, this is a dream, though. And he was like, oh, I'm still here. And I would have those reoccurring dreams. And I finally worked myself up to the fact that if I'm seeing him and he's on the other side and everything's okay, I want him to verify the existence of God. So one night I said, can you tell me what God feels like? Can you show me? And immediately I was over a lake, a serene lake, with a big rope swing that just went to the sky, wasn't attached to anything. And as I went over the face of this very serene water lake, my big toe skimmed just very barely over the top of it, and the dream was over with, and that was it.
Wow.
So I never saw him since. So I've learned, be careful, because if you start knocking on that door to the other side, it can go away, and I've never really had a dream with him since. But he did show me what it felt like. He very clearly gave me that sensation of what it felt like, what God was like.
Yes, because it's that sensation of being, like, for me, it was like just protection and safe, you know? And for you, it was like serene and peaceful. And it's all him. All these definitions are him, you know?
Yeah.
And we all experience him differently. You know, and these are conversations I have with my husband because he's like, well, how do you experience him? Like, how do you know it's him? And I said, oh, you learn over time when he shows up, you know, because he feels the same way inside your body every time you have confirmation. And I've had some powerful encounters with him, and they were all detailed in Journey to Me. And chapter 14 was another it was a huge encounter with him at 3 o'clock in the morning. And it always happens super early in the mornings with him and me. So, you know, he's going to show up to you in different ways. And that's awesome.
Absolutely.
I'm so grateful that you got that experience and that you live your life, you know, knowing. A lot of people go through life so cynical. And it's so sad because you're never alone. He's always there next to you. And that's amazing to know as you journey.
Absolutely. Yeah, it is. It's very comforting. Well, thank you for sharing your story. I really appreciate it. Good luck with everything as we move forward.
No, you too. You too. And thanks so much for reaching out. I really appreciate you.
Bet.
And I hope you have a wonderful Labor Day weekend.
Thanks for tuning in to another famous interview with Joe Dimino, where we cover the world of art, literature, and music and business around the globe. If you want to hear more interviews, visit the Famous Interviews with Joe Dimino channel on YouTube. Thanks again for listening, and until next time.